Hello, and welcome to the 13th episode of Did You Know, in which I use the wonderful archives of the Northern Echo to shed some light on a strange and curious historical fascination. Now, next Saturday, that's June the 3rd, 2023, I'm leading a walk on behalf of Darlington Historical Society around South Park, which you can see there in an early photograph, where there's all sorts of wonderful historical fascinations in the park, and it's a very pioneering park. It is one of the very first in the north, was the first in the northeast, and one of the very first in the north as a municipal park. So it's a magnificent sort of a place, and we are going to be meeting near the Fothergill Fountain. Now, do you know who the eponymous Mr. Fothergill actually was? And do you know the fantastic story that is attached to his rather beautiful and certainly stately fountain that stands at the entrance to South Park? Now, to understand all of this, go right back to the 1830s, when the world was awash with drink, when Britain was aflood with drink, when drink was pouring out of all of Darlington's streets. And so in 1831, the Darlington Moderation Society was formed, one of the first groups in the country to tackle this social menace. And its members agreed to moderate their intake of alcohol, not give it up completely, just to moderate their intake of alcohol. And a chap called George Mottram was an early convert to the cause. He was the original drunken sailor. He'd stolen a boat whilst under the influence and had been sentenced to death. But his sentence had been commuted when he joined the Darlington Moderation Society, and he became one of their evangelists. In fact, you could say that he became the toast of the Darlington Moderation Society. Now, one day he set off on a stagecoach to convert the drunken heathens of Barnard Castle to the ways of moderation. But unfortunately, on the journey from Darlington to Barney, he got so hopelessly drunk, but by the time he arrived, he was unable to speak. And so people realized that moderation was not the answer. Then, so over in Preston in 1833, the 7 men of Preston went one step further than the Darlington Moderation Society. The 7 men climbed onto a platform in front of their peers and signed a pledge, swearing they would give up alcohol forever. Indeed, one of the 7 men of Preston was a chap called Richard Dickey Turner, who had a strong Lancastrian accent and quite probably a bad stutter. As he took to the platform to sign the pledge, he declared that his abstinence would be teetotal. And so the word teetotal entered the dictionary. And the concept of teetotalism quickly spread. And in Darlington, a branch of the Total Abstinence Society was formed in August 1835 above a watchmaker's shop in High Row. A local doctor, Dr. John Fothergill, was elected its first president, a position he held for 23 years until his death. But abstinence was not a popular cause. The brewing industry was very powerful, and they were obviously against abstinence. And Dr. Fothergill's own medical profession believed drink to be most efficacious, particularly because most of the fresh, in inverted commas, water came out of contaminated wells that brought all sorts of terrible contagions with it. So brewed beer was probably safer than the water. But even religion was against teetotalism and total abstinence, especially Methodism, because they feared that devotion to abstinence was replacing devotion to God. But still, The temperance movement, the total abstinence movement caught on. In Darlington alone, there was the Temperance Choral Union, there was the Temperance Debating Society, there was the Women's Temperance Association, the Juvenile Temperance Society, and in Gladstone Street, there was the Temperance Institute as well, which you can still find near North Lodge Park. So, President Fothergill of the Darlington Total Absence Society was much admired for his persistent battling against the odds. When he died, it was agreed that a water fountain should be erected in his memory, particularly appropriate for the president of an abstinence society, especially as he was a doctor who liked to prescribe a long drink of cold, fresh water to his patients. And so the Darlington Total Abstinence Society held a competition to design a suitable fountain. The top prize was 2 guineas, and it was scooped by a 17-year-old called Septimus Hurd. He was a trainee architect. Now, there were 2 things wrong with Septimus. First of all, he lived in the Green Tree Inn, which was on Skinnergate, just at the junction with Grange Road, Conscliffe Road, and Blackwell Gate. It's now a new, fairly new Indian restaurant occupying the site of the Green Tree Inn. So, living in an inn was not an especially appropriate place for the designer of a temperance monument to live, really. But that was the least of their worries, because having handed in his entry to the competition, Septimus had gone to Redcar for a swim in the sea, where unfortunately he drowned on July the 1st, 1861. So before they could get round to building the Fothergill Memorial Fountain, they had to build the Hurd Memorial, and they erected a huge obelisk over his grave in West Cemetery, as you can see on the right there. Although my picture isn't especially clever, I need to do something better, go out and get a better one than that. But they got the Hurd Memorial up and in place, and then they turned their attentions to the Fothergill Fountain, which was ready for opening on June the 10th, 1862. Now, led by Dr. Fothergill's successor as president of the society, a chap called William Thompson, and with music from the Darlington Saxhorn Band, the abstainers paraded from the Mechanics Institute in Skinnergate, along back Blackwell Gate, along High Row, and then up Bongate to the fountain, which was erected, I think it's just about kind of outside the Tap and Spile, where that is now. The Darlington Stockton Times reported on the occasion. It said, "A vast concourse of people assembled to witness the proceedings, and although rain fell and the clouds threatened to deluge, they stood and watched the ceremony to the end." Now, in fact, the opening day was so wet that everyone had to come back the following day to have their picture taken. And you can see the puddles in the bottom of the picture still on the road from the torrent, the downpour the day before. And this picture is in Darlington Library in the Centre for Local Studies. And you've got all of the names of the people who attended the ceremony there. Now, as you can imagine, during the ceremony there was much speechifying in the rain, praising Dr. Fothergill and praising temperance and abstinence. But not everyone agreed. The D&S Times said Jack Watson, as Mr. John Watson, painter, is popularly known, was in the crowd, and he caused some slight annoyance. He was 3 sheets to the wind, and he seemed to delight in interrupting the speakers with a sort of running commentary, and with a heavy hiccup he vented his dissatisfaction. The ceremony took place at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so we may safely assume that Mr. Watson had not spent the morning in prayer. The D&S Times' report concludes, Mr. William Johnson shot a bolt at Mr. Watson, telling him that he shouldn't be surprised to hear of some of his class sneaking along the street early some Sunday morning when they couldn't get any drink elsewhere, and moistening their parched lips after a night's fuddle at this very fountain. Loud laughter and cheers followed this ready-witted remark, says the DNS, and the company shortly afterwards dispersed. Presumably, they didn't disperse to the pub. Now, the Fothergill Fountain proved as much of a nuisance as a drunk at the unveiling of a temperance memorial. It spewed out water. Now, as you can see, the street of Bongate was made of mud, really. And the mud was ground up by the large wheels on the carts. The horses pulled the carts and lifted their tails and deposited their contribution to the street scene as well, all of which was ground up by the big whales. And now you have got lots of water gushing out of the fountain, to really create a horrible, miry mess in one of Darlington's main streets. In fact, it was so bad they had to build a walkway about a foot high across the street from the Tap and Spile side over towards the Skinnergate side, so women could walk without getting their long flowing skirts dirty with the very unpleasant mess, and other people were worried that they were sinking beneath the depth of their ankles into this messy, muddy nastiness on the street, all caused by the Fothergill Memorial Fountain. And so in 1875, so that's less than 15 years after its unveiling, it was moved out of the way to South Park, which is traditionally where Darlington's unwanted historical bric-a-brac has been deposited. There's a cannon, there's another big vase fountain, there's a memorial with nothing on the top of it, there are bits of old railway. Best of all, there's a cannon as well. I should tell you the story of that one day. Loads and loads of fascinating trees that people have forgotten about, all over there, all that have been accumulated over the centuries, as I shall attempt to explain on Saturday, June the 3rd, when we meet at the Fothergill Fountain. So, thank you very much indeed for your time. Please subscribe to this thing so you never miss a scintillating episode. And then dash over to the Northern Echo's wondrous website, where every morning at 9:30, one of my magnificent local history stories is added. And over there are all sorts of subscriptions and offers and bargains for you. Plus, of course, a load and loads of magnificent stories to keep you entertained. So, thank you very much indeed for watching this episode of Did You Know? And when we meet in the park by the Fothergill Fountain on Saturday at 2 o'clock, you'll be able to say, yes, I already know the amazing story of Dr. John Fothergill and the Darlington Total Abstinence Society, and I know all about the Fothergill Fountain. Thank you for your time, and goodbye for now.